Hey guys, how's it going? So in this video, I wanted to talk about my personal camera setups for my FX30, which is also applicable to FX3, obviously. So depending on the type of shooting and the situation, you're going to generally need different types of setups, sometimes a lot more minimal or sometimes a lot bigger, depending on how you need to set things up. So these are just my own personal use cases and how I like to set things up with different parts. And you may like some, or you might prefer different parts yourself, and that's totally fine. This is just to give you some ideas, or if you're currently researching ways or different parts as well. So hopefully this video can help you out in that regard. So yeah, let's get into it. So when it comes to any camera build setups, you're first going to need a camera cage. And I typically like to get mine from Small Rig, as they're well built and are very affordable compared to other brands. I've also attached a wrist strap by Tilter to this cage, but I'll go over that a little later on. The cage also comes with this separate top-mounted NATO rail, which is typically required to attach something like a top handle or another accessory. And here are the model numbers for these items. The Tilter wrist strap does come in a left-handed version as well, but for this particular cage, it will only attach to the right-hand side. But before I get to the cage, I'm first going to replace the battery door. And this is so that I can use a dummy battery with a battery instead. So on the inside hinge of the door is a spring mechanism, which when pushed allows you to remove it from the camera. And I'm then going to replace it with this one, with the only difference being that it has an additional flap that you can open to let a cable through. This particular one is a non-branded one I found on eBay, but you can find branded ones as well, which should work just the same. So here I have a dummy battery by Alvin's Cables, and this particular one has a D-tap connector. There's a number of brands you can get these from, and most should come with different connection types as well, depending on what you need. And now going back to the cage, as you can see on the right side of the cage, there's two slits located on the bottom and on the top for you to attach a strap. Now, when I first got this, I did struggle a little bit, as there were no visible slits on the back to feed through, so I wasn't exactly sure how to install this initially. And when you first receive this, it may or may not already come fully assembled, I can't quite remember, but you would need to undo it and pull it out so it looks like this. So you'll want to start from the bottom slit on the cage and have the strap come through from the inside out. And then pull it all the way through like this. And then once you've done that, feed it back into the slit, but underneath the top strap. And this will likely take a little bit of finessing to get it through, but just take your time. And once you've got it out, just pull the rest of the strap through. Now all you have to do is feed it through the top slit, which should be much easier to do. And then finally, feed it through the top slit on the cage. I bought this particular strap from Tilter because I had used it a few times before on a friend's camera and I really liked it. There are other straps you can buy, even one made by Small Rig, but having read reviews and researching the other ones, they didn't seem as reliable as this one, and even had cases where the strap broke not long after buying. And dropping my camera or lens is definitely not something that I want to happen from a weak or poor quality strap. Having used this for a while now, I can say it's held up really well, and it's definitely strong enough to hold a decent amount of weight. The strap is made of nylon, which is pretty durable, so I do expect this to last quite some time. The main drawback to this strap is that it's not easy to take on and off, as you can see. So realistically, it will remain attached to the camera cage for the majority of the time, but it honestly doesn't add that much extra width to the rig, so it shouldn't really matter that much anyway. But do let me know in the comments if you do have a solution or come across something that can easily attach or detach the strap. And I don't think these buckles are completely necessary, but they are included and it wouldn't hurt to put them on as well, just to make it a little bit more secure, I guess. So now it's time to put the cage on the camera, and to ensure that all the screws are tightly secured so there isn't any accidental wiggling or rotating. And what's great about these cages is that they will typically come with a little flathead tool, so you don't have to go and find one or carry one with you. They've also incorporated this opening on the cage to allow for the battery door to fully open. And this likely would have been done in order to keep the design of the cage in line with the camera's exact shape. So this would be the bare minimum if I was going for a compact setup. And now I'll be attaching this adjustable battery plate. But just make sure to check the model number, as there is another very similar one, but that one doesn't allow it to slide out. So this is an Arca Swiss plate, which is what the camera cage also uses, so it will slide in perfectly. And then once you have it in a position you're happy with, simply lock it in place with this lever on the front. And on the side, there is another lever, allowing you to extend the plate further out for more room. And also a locking knob to adjust the tilt of the plate, which you'll need in order for the screen to be able to come out. And also when attaching a V-mount battery, it can help with counterbalancing the camera as well, if it becomes too front heavy with a lens or other accessories attached. And now with the V-mount battery on the plate, I can connect the D-tap cable from the dummy battery to the V-mount battery. And this will give me a much longer battery life than using just the normal batteries. So I'll just quickly put on a lens before moving on to attaching a monitor. The monitor mount that I'm using is unfortunately now discontinued, but has been replaced with this newer model by SmallRig. Both my version here and the newer version feature ARRI locking pins to prevent any unwanted twisting when the monitor is mounted. And the tilt and swivel maneuverability on this functions really smoothly as well from my usage. So the monitor that I'm using is the HoloLens Mars M1 Enhanced, which is an upgraded model from the original version. So this is a 5.5 inch monitor with 1000 nits of brightness, and supports both HDMI and SDI inputs. And it can be powered using an NPF battery like this one, or through the DC port on the back, which I'll show later. It does also come with a sun hood, which you will first need to clamp on this attachment to the monitor to be then able to insert the sun hood, which definitely does come in handy on really sunny days when you're outdoors. Having a larger screen and longer battery life is definitely a step up from before, and it's still relatively compact in my opinion. You may need to take the monitor off to fit it into a camera bag or case, but that's pretty quick to do, so I think this setup is actually pretty solid. Now, with that said, there are two extra things I like to do to improve my overall setup. And the first one is to attach a tripod plate. This not only lets me hold the plate for greater stability when shooting, but also generally sits quite flush when you place it on the ground or another surface without it falling over. The second thing is using a top handle. This one is also unfortunately discontinued, but there are plenty of other options from SmallRig. Just make sure you find one that uses a NATO clamp, as these are the quickest and easiest to attach and remove, and will be compatible with the cage. You might also want to check if it has ARRI locking mounts so that you can attach this particular monitor mount. or you could opt to get a completely different mount if you wish, as most of these top handles do have multiple mounting options for you. So as I mentioned before, the NATO clamp and rail mount makes it super quick and easy to install. You just slide it on and tighten without the need for any other tools. And with that attached, it can easily hold a monitor without any problems. I did also want to talk about Sony's top handle and why I prefer using third-party handles instead. So if you're not familiar, Sony does sell this XLR H1 top handle, which has audio inputs and controls built in. So you would think that buying this handle would be the perfect choice, as it was also made specifically to be used for the FX3 and FX30. However, if you do a bit of research, you'll quickly find that there's been a number of complaints from users. One such complaint is just how short the handle is, making it not as ergonomic to grip as it should, and has even led to other brands making attachments to make it longer. Another complaint is with the build quality, with many users feeling that it was too plasticky and had poor construction, not of a premium quality that should be reflective of the price of this handle. There have also been users who found that the audio quality just wasn't as good as other standalone audio recorders and produced some pretty noticeable hissing noises as well. The main issue that I have with this handle is with the limited options to mount a monitor. Yes, you can still mount one, and there are solutions out there, but they all seem to either require additional rods and accessories to make work, or the monitor ends up in a less than ideal position, like being really high up, or at the back of the handle, which is not what I'm after. With the audio unit taking up most of the front portion of the handle, it leaves very little room for any ideal monitor placements, and that's why I prefer to go with a normal top handle that's well built and has tons more options for mounting accessories when I actually need them, like the Zoom H1 XLR audio recorder that I made a video on previously, which you can go check out. So with that rant out of the way, I would say this is my most preferred setup, as the top handle allows for easier handling overall, especially shooting from low angles. It also puts the monitor a little higher so it has more room to tilt, and allows the camera rig to be more stabilized as a whole. And this setup wouldn't be complete without also adding in a matte box. So the matte box comes with two threaded plates, an 82 and 77mm, but there are a few other sizes you can get as well to fit your particular lens thread, which you'll need in order to attach the matte box. So you simply just screw it onto the lens, and then slip on the matte box and tighten it in place. The kit that I have comes with a circular polarizer and two fixed neutral density filters, or ND filters for short. However, these particular filters are engineered differently to regular fixed ND filters, where the circular polarizer can be rotated, allowing for the ND filters to change exposure, therefore becoming variable rather than fixed. So you'd need both of these items in order to make it a variable ND setup. And this setup definitely looks the most impressive, especially in front of clients, but it is also the heaviest, and I don't always need a matte box, especially if I'm shooting indoors. But it is nice to have, and does come in handy depending on where I'm shooting. There is, however, one minor issue with this setup, and that's with the battery on the back of the monitor, which limits the amount of tilting I can do. This isn't a huge issue for me, as I generally don't need the monitor to be completely flat. And taking the matte box off does give me a little bit more room to move, but would still become an issue if I were to use a larger MPF battery. So the best option in this case is to power it through the DC port instead. So this is a DC barrel locking screw connector to D-tap cable, which you can find pretty easily online, and what I'll be using to connect the monitor to a V-mount battery. And that will go into the DC in port right here. And then once that's connected, the monitor can be parallel with the camera. There is, however, one big caveat to this particular setup. By pairing both the camera and the monitor using the same V-mount battery, there is the potential for something called a ground loop. And what this basically means in relation to video cameras specifically is that it can fry the HDMI port on the camera if both the camera and monitor are being powered by the same V-mount battery. This doesn't always occur, but there have been cases of it happening with different camera brands like Sony, Blackmagic, Red, Canon, and Panasonic. So for me personally, I don't want to take the risk with my camera, and so I'm okay with using MPF batteries on my monitor or using the V-mount battery to only power one of those things. With that said, however, I do have a workaround if I did want to power the camera and monitor separately without using MPF batteries. So I've gone ahead and taken the dummy battery out and put the original battery back in. And I'm just going to unlock and slide the plate all the way back. And what's great about this plate is that it actually has these openings here to feed things through, which is perfect because that's how I intend to strap a power bank to it. So I'm using a 10,000 milliamp power bank, and it's actually a perfect size for this. And I also happen to have these Velcro straps, which you can find on Amazon or eBay. This one is around 25 centimeters. And now that I have securely attached it to the plate, I can connect it to the USB-C port on the camera, which will continuously charge the battery inside the camera, extending its overall battery life. And then once I attach the V-mount battery on the back of the plate as well, this will now let me power both the camera and monitor without the risk of a potential ground loop, and also allowing the monitor to be fully parallel with the camera. I would also normally tidy up the cables to make it neater, but you get the idea. So ultimately it's up to you whether you want to connect multiple devices to a single power source or play it safe and power them independently. And before I get to the last setup, I first want to talk about screw-on filters. As I mentioned previously, I don't always use a matte box because sometimes it's too big or impractical, so I would use these instead. And more specifically, magnetic filters. So the set that I use are the Nano X filters from K&F Concept. And these simply work by first screwing on the magnetic adapter to the lens, which you can then snap on a lens cap and a variable ND filter. I did also buy an additional lens cap to cover the variable ND filter as well, but it did need to be a slightly larger size in order to fit the filter. And so this way I could leave the filter on the lens and protect it when not in use, and just easily take the whole thing off when I needed to. And this has made shooting so much easier, not having to waste time screwing on filters, which I would highly recommend getting over the typical screw-on filters. And if you do plan on getting these from K&F Concept, make sure you get the correct adapter, as the ones made for the variable ND filters have these recessed locking grooves, whereas the ones that don't have them are only meant to be used attaching the lens cap or with fixed ND filters. Because otherwise it'll be really difficult to rotate and adjust the polarization properly, as you needed to first lock into place before being able to rotate the front element in the intended way. So just make sure that you're getting the right adapter when purchasing. And now to the final setup, which is having the camera on the gimbal. As you can tell, I can only really have the cage and wrist strap for this setup. So I'm using the DJI RS2 gimbal, which is pretty old now, and doesn't have as much width as the newer models, making it a bit harder to position the camera with the wrist strap on. But I do also have the option to mount it onto the plate sideways, so it's not really an issue. And then I also like to add this additional power bank holder, which I've also attached the NATO clamp that comes with the gimbal, and slides right onto the NATO connection port right here. and then just attaching the exact same power bank from before. And with this setup, I can run the camera on the gimbal for a few hours while still keeping it relatively lightweight. And also connecting a run-stop cable to the gimbal makes it much easier to hit record. And there you have it. These are all of my different camera setups depending on the particular shoot. So I hope you guys have found this useful and have given you some ideas for your very own setup. And as always, I'll catch you guys in the next one.